Between 1987 and 1998, at least 14 women were found dead in south-central Los Angeles. All strangled. All left partially clothed in alleys, behind dumpsters, near abandoned buildings, discarded like they didn't matter.
Murdering them in their most vulnerable positions and impossible circumstances.
The victims were all African American women, most struggling with addiction or homelessness, working the streets to survive. They ranged in age from their early 20s to mid-40s, and they were all killed within a 5-mile radius of downtown Los Angeles. For over a decade, a predator hunted these women while police struggled to connect the dots. The city was drowning in crack cocaine and violence. Homicide rates hit 2,000 per year, and these victims, marginalized, vulnerable, invisible, weren't priorities. The man responsible would eventually be called the Southside Slayer. His real name, Chester Dwayne Turner, a serial killer who murdered at least 14 women that we know of, though investigators believe the real number could be much higher. What makes this case particularly haunting is that Turner wasn't some criminal mastermind hiding in shadows. He lived among his victims. He knew many of them, and police encountered him multiple times, arresting him for inappropriate offenses that should have been red flags. His high school classmates even gave him a nickname that warned everyone exactly what he was: Chester the Molester. But those warnings were ignored, and 14 women paid the price. This is the story of how one man killed for 11 years in plain sight, and how one survivor finally brought him down. Diane Johnson was 21 years old when her body was found in a construction area just off the 110 freeway near downtown Los Angeles. It was March 1987. She had been manually strangled. Someone had wrapped their hands around her throat and squeezed until she died. The medical examiner noted it would have taken several minutes. Diane was conscious for most of it, fighting until the very end. Her hands showed defensive wounds, meaning she'd fought back hard. On top of that, she had been assaulted before death and left partially clothed. Semen was collected and preserved. But in 1987, DNA analysis was still in its infancy. So because of that, the evidence went into storage. Diane's murder was horrific, but in a city experiencing epidemic levels of violence, it was just one more case file, one more body, one more unsolved murder. 7 months later, in October 1987, another body was discovered. Annette Ernest was found on the shoulder of a road in South Central. Her exact age was unknown. She'd been living on the streets for years, and investigators only identified her through fingerprints. The similarities to Diane Johnson's murder were impossible to ignore. Same geographic area, same victim demographic. Young African-American woman, likely involved in street-level work. Same method, manual strangulation. Same signature, partially clothed body in a semi-public location. But police didn't officially connect the cases yet. The department was overwhelmed. Resources were stretched impossibly thin. 2 years passed. Then in 1989, Anita Barrera's body was found. She was 31 years old, strangled outside a garage off Figueroa Street, a corridor notorious for prostitution and drug activity. Forensic evidence showed she'd been assaulted immediately before being killed. Her body was left in plain sight, positioned where someone would find her quickly. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Within weeks of Anita's murder, another body appeared. Regina Washington, found in a garage off Figueroa Street, strangled and once again assaulted. Just like the previous victims, she too was found partially clothed. But Regina's murder carried an additional horror. She was 6 months pregnant when she died. The killer had looked at a visibly pregnant woman and strangled her anyway. No hesitation, no mercy, complete detachment from human suffering. By this point, 1989, with 4 murders showing nearly identical patterns, law enforcement finally took serious action. The LAPD and LA County Sheriff's Department formed the Southside Slayer Task Force. At its peak, 50 investigators worked the case. They interviewed hundreds of people. They collected evidence meticulously. They documented everything. But they had no suspect, no witnesses, no DNA matches because the technology to search and compare DNA profiles didn't exist yet in any functional database. So they preserved the evidence and waited for science to catch up. Meanwhile, the killer kept hunting. Andrea Triplett was found strangled off Figueroa Street. The medical examiner noted she'd been dead approximately 72 hours before discovery, meaning the killer had chosen a slightly more isolated location to delay detection. This time, evidence showed ligature strangulation. The killer had used something other than his hands, possibly a cord or piece of clothing. He was refining his method. Desiree Washington's body was discovered in the same corridor. Same method, same victim profile. The pattern was so consistent that investigators knew with certainty they were dealing with a single offender operating in a defined geographic area. But the task force was shrinking. By the early 1990s, only 15 investigators remained assigned to the case. Resources were being pulled to address escalating gang violence and the crack epidemic's mounting death toll. But the killer isn't done yet. Natalie Price was 31 years old when her body was found in 1995. She had been strangled and assaulted like the others, but her body was in an advanced state of decomposition, meaning the killer had selected a more secluded dump site this time. Around this time, it's clear that he was becoming more careful, more strategic about delaying discovery. Mildred Beasley was 45 years old when her body was found in November 1996 in a lot off Figueroa Street. Her murder was particularly brazen. She was left in a location with moderate foot traffic, suggesting the killer had attacked late at night when the area was temporarily deserted. By this point, the killer had been operating for nearly a decade, and he felt completely untouchable.
There were almost 70 African American women who were killed during this time period, during the 1980s, early 1990s. And at that time, there was, within the African American community in Los Angeles, there was kind of a hysteria for all of these women to be killed, in that area during that time period.
On February 3, 1998, a 24-year-old woman named Paula Vance was walking through an alley in South Central shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning, unaware that she was being watched. What Paula didn't know was that a security camera had recently been installed in that area to catch people illegally dumping trash. That camera was running that night, quietly recording everything. The footage shows Paula stopping briefly near a dumpster. Moments later, a very large man suddenly appears and grabs her from behind. He wraps his arm tightly around her neck and forces her down to the ground with brutal strength. For nearly 8 minutes, the camera captures the horrifying attack. His face is never clearly visible. The darkness and camera angle make identification impossible. However, one thing is clear: his size. He is enormous, easily over 6 feet tall and likely weighing more than 200 pounds. When the assault ends, he simply stands up, adjusts his clothes, and walks away. There is no panic and no rush. Instead, he moves with calm, unsettling confidence, as if he knows he will never be caught. Then, in April 1998, Brenda Breeze, 39 years old, was found near Little Tokyo, slightly outside the killer's usual hunting ground. She had been strangled and assaulted, then left near a portable toilet. The geographic deviation suggested the killer was either running out of safe dump sites or his judgment was being impaired by drug use. After Brenda Breeze, the murders seemed to stop. For 4 years, no new victims were discovered matching this signature. The case went cold. The task force disbanded. But the killer hadn't stopped. He was still out there, still dangerous. And in March 2002, he made a critical mistake. Maria Martinez was 47 years old, staying at the Downtown Women's Center homeless shelter. Just after midnight on March 16, 2002, she stepped outside for air. She saw a man she recognized from the shelter, large, with a distinctive scar across his cheek. He asked for a cigarette, then a light. She gave him both. Then he grabbed her and dragged her behind a dumpster. For 2 hours, He assaulted Maria Martinez just like his other victims. When it was over, he threatened her. "If you go to the police, I will come back and kill you." But Maria did something extraordinary. She went directly to the police. She gave a detailed statement. Then she went to the hospital for an assault kit examination. That DNA sample was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database, and when the results came back, everything changed. The matches came flooding in, one after another. Diane Johnson, match Annette Ernest, match Anita Barrera, match Regina Washington, match Andrea Triplett, match Desiree Washington, match Natalie Price, match Mildred Beasley, match Paula Vance, match Brenda Breeze, match 10 unsolved murders, 1 DNA profile, Chester Dwayne Turner. Investigators pulled Turner's booking photo and compared it to the Paula Vance surveillance footage. The size matched perfectly. 6 feet 2, over 200 pounds. Distinctive scar across his left cheek. Police found Turner hiding in a shower stall at a homeless shelter. He was arrested without incident. But as investigators dug deeper, they discovered the true scope of Turner's crimes and a devastating miscarriage of justice. A man named David Allen Jones, who was mentally disabled, had been wrongfully convicted years earlier for 3 murders. When Turner's DNA was tested against evidence from those cases, the results were clear. Chester Turner killed those women. Jones was innocent. Jones was immediately released and later awarded $750,000. But nothing could return his lost years. The 3 additional victims brought Turner's count to 13. Then in 2014, advanced DNA analysis linked Turner to 4 more murders. Alondra Buxton, found strangled in 1988, Mary Edwards, discovered near railroad tracks in 1992, then Deborah Williams, found in 1987, possibly Turner's first victim, Cynthia Annette Johnson, found in 1992, 14 confirmed victims, and investigators believe there are more. When you have a serial killer operating in an area like South Central during the crack epidemic, explained one detective, the number of missing persons and unidentified bodies is staggering. Turner was active for at least 11 years. There are almost certainly victims we'll never know about. But what turned him into a serial killer? Chester Dwayne Turner was born November 5, 1966, in Warren, Arkansas. His childhood was a textbook case of how violence creates violence. As it turns out, Chester's father regularly beat his mother, and young Chester watched it all unfold. When a boy witnesses his father controlling his mother through violence, it creates a template. This becomes his framework for how men treat women. Dr. Brianna Fox, a psychological criminologist who studied Turner's case, explains, children who witness intimate partner violence experience changes in brain development, particularly in areas governing emotional regulation and empathy. They're being trained to see violence as normal, but even then, none of this excuses what he did. Many other children went through similar experiences and never became capable of such acts. So to be clear, this is not an attempt to justify his actions. Instead, by looking at his past, we begin to understand what truly shaped him and how he became the person he was. Chester's mother eventually left and moved to California, hoping for a fresh start, but they ended up in South Central Los Angeles, specifically the 600 block of Century Boulevard. In the 1970s, this was one of the city's most dangerous areas. Overwhelmed by the violence, Chester's mother sent him back to Arkansas to live with his father, who had remarried. But things got worse. According to reports, his stepmother beat him regularly. She allowed her biological children to beat him too, and Chester was forbidden from fighting back. The rage had nowhere to go. It turned inward, where it festered. Chester moved back to Los Angeles, back to his mother. But she began psychologically abusing him, locking him out of the house, withholding food, treating him like he didn't exist. Attachment disorder was forming. Chester was learning that people who were supposed to love you would hurt you, that women were sources of both need and neglect, that power was the only currency that mattered. By high school, the warning signs were undeniable. At Locke High School in South Central, Chester was bullied relentlessly. He self-medicated with drugs and alcohol. But more alarming was his behavior toward female students. He began touching girls in hallways, forcing unwanted physical contact. His classmates gave him a nickname that should have been a screaming warning: Chester the Molester. Think about that. Students recognized the pattern clearly enough to name him for it. But this was South Central in the early 1980s. Schools were overwhelmed with gang violence and drugs. Chester's inappropriate aggression didn't register as urgent. No consequences, no intervention, no boundaries. And what did that teach him? That he could violate women without retribution. When Chester was 15, his mother moved to Utah and left him behind. He dropped out of school. A 15-year-old boy, alone on the streets of South Central. At 16, Chester had a growth spurt. He became physically imposing, 6'2", over 200 pounds, and the violence escalated. He stabbed another teenager in the stomach, and back then, there were no charges filed. He fought with a police officer and injured a police dog, receiving an animal cruelty charge, another red flag that appears in serial offender histories. But nothing stuck in any meaningful way. By the mid-1980s, Los Angeles was in the grip of a crack cocaine epidemic. South Central was devastated. Young women traded inappropriate activities for drugs on street corners, behind abandoned buildings. They weren't asking for money, just the next hit. These women became Chester Turner's targets. Turner wasn't some reclusive loner. He worked as a cook at a restaurant. He stayed at homeless shelters. He maintained a relationship with a woman named Felicia Collier, who later reported his violence toward her. One night, Turner came home with scratches all over his body. Work accident, he claimed. But those were defensive wounds. Someone had fought back. In 1991, Turner was arrested twice for lewd conduct, touching himself in front of a crossing guard, then exposing himself hours after being released. These arrests should have been turning points. But California law didn't require DNA collection for misdemeanor offenses in 1991. Turner's DNA never entered the system, and at least 6 more women died because of that gap in the law. Turner understood something else too. He could kill women in South Central with minimal risk. These victims were black women, often homeless, often struggling with addiction. The Southside Slayer task force peaked at 50 investigators, then dropped to 15 as resources were redirected. These women weren't seen as priorities by a system that failed them at every level. And Turner exploited that failure ruthlessly. When Chester Turner finally sat in a Los Angeles courtroom in September 2007, prosecutors had spent 5 exhausting years building a case that would expose the full scope of his crimes. The trial for 9 counts of first-degree murder would become one of the most significant serial killer prosecutions in California history. The prosecution's strategy was both simple and devastating in its effectiveness. They began by playing the Paula Vance surveillance footage, that grainy, haunting video from February 1998 that captured Turner attacking and killing a 24-year-old woman in an alley. Even though the video quality made facial identification impossible, it showed everything the jury needed to understand about how Turner operated: the surprise attack from behind, the overwhelming physical force, the calculated brutality, and the casual confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Then came the scientific evidence that would seal Turner's fate. Forensic experts walked the jury through DNA analysis in painstaking detail, explaining how genetic material recovered from 9 different murder victims all matched Chester Turner's DNA profile, with statistical probabilities so astronomical they defied comprehension. We're talking about odds in the billions to 1, numbers so large they essentially represent scientific certainty. The defense team attempted to construct a narrative that defied all logic and probability. Their argument suggested that Turner had simply had consensual sexual encounters with these 9 women, and that some unknown third party had then coincidentally murdered each of them using identical methods in the same geographic area over the same time period. Prosecutors dismantled this theory with devastating simplicity, pointing out that such a scenario would require believing in a series of coincidences so improbable they bordered on impossible. But the most powerful moment of the entire trial came when Maria Martinez took the witness stand. This was the woman whose courage had finally brought Turner to justice, and her testimony carried the weight of not just her own trauma, but the memory of every woman Turner had killed. She recounted the 2-hour assault in painful, precise detail, never wavering, never breaking down, maintaining the same strength she'd shown when she walked into that police station instead of staying silent out of fear. "I kept thinking about how many other women he might have done this to," Mariah told the jury, her voice steady despite the difficulty of reliving that night. "If I don't say something, if I let fear control me, he's going to keep doing this to other women. I couldn't live with that on my conscience. I couldn't let him hurt anyone else if there was anything I could do to stop it." The courtroom was silent as she spoke. Several jurors were visibly emotional. Even the judge seemed moved by her testimony.
But what he took from our family can never be replaced. Never. You know, he tried to destroy our family, but he needs to know he didn't destroy anything. He made us stronger.
That's a family member of one of the victims who was killed by 47-year-old Chester D. Turner, one of the most prolific killers in Los Angeles history.
Throughout the trial, Turner himself displayed behavior that shocked courtroom observers and revealed his complete lack of remorse or humanity. He laughed occasionally at testimony describing his victim's suffering. He appeared relaxed and unconcerned, as if he were watching a television show rather than facing accountability for taking multiple lives. On one particularly disturbing occasion, as bailiffs escorted him out of the courtroom after a day of testimony, multiple witnesses reported seeing him deliberately mouth the words, "I'll be back," toward the gallery where victims' families sat. It was a final act of psychological cruelty from a man who seemed incapable of empathy. The jury deliberated for less than 2 full days before returning their verdict on January 7, 2007, guilty on all 9 counts of first-degree murder. During the penalty phase that followed, they recommended death, and the judge imposed 9 separate death sentences, 1 for each life Chester Turner had taken. As of now, Chester Dwayne Turner remains incarcerated on death row at San Quentin State Prison, where California houses male inmates awaiting execution. He is currently 68 years old, and the reality is that he will almost certainly never face the death penalty that was imposed on him 13 separate times. California has not executed a single prisoner since 2006, when the state became mired in lengthy legal challenges over its execution protocols and whether they violated constitutional prohibitions against cruel and unusual punishment. Then, in 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom issued an official moratorium on all executions, effectively halting the death penalty in California for the duration of his administration. Given these circumstances, Turner will in all likelihood die of natural causes in his prison cell decades from now, having avoided the punishment that multiple juries determined he deserved. Over the years since his convictions, Turner has filed numerous appeals challenging various aspects of his trials and sentences. He has argued that his limited confessions to investigators were coerced through improper interrogation techniques. He has claimed that his constitutional rights were systematically violated throughout the investigation and prosecution. He has alleged that he didn't receive adequate legal representation. Every single one of these appeals has been rejected by reviewing courts. The California Supreme Court thoroughly examined his case and upheld all his convictions in 2010, finding no reversible errors in how the trials were conducted. The United States Supreme Court declined to hear his case in 2011, letting the California court's decision stand. When Turner filed yet another round of appeals in 2015, those too were summarily rejected. Throughout all these years of legal proceedings, Chester Turner has maintained a peculiar stance regarding his guilt. He has never fully admitted to the murders, never provided details that only the killer would know, never expressed genuine remorse for the lives he destroyed. Yet he also stops carefully short of claiming complete innocence, perhaps understanding that such a claim would be absurd in the face of overwhelming DNA evidence. In the rare prison interviews he has granted to journalists and documentarians over the years, Turner instead suggests vague alternative explanations that don't hold up to even minimal scrutiny. He hints that perhaps the DNA evidence was somehow contaminated during collection or analysis, though he can't explain how or by whom. He implies that he's being framed, that police and prosecutors needed someone to blame for these unsolved murders, and he was simply convenient, though he offers no theory about who actually committed the crimes or why authorities would choose him specifically to frame. He suggests that the justice system railroaded him, though he can't articulate any plausible explanation for why his DNA would be present on 14 different murder victims if he didn't kill them. What Turner won't do, what he has never done in over 20 years since his arrest, is look the families of his victims in the eye and admit what he did. He won't acknowledge their humanity or their suffering. He won't take responsibility, and he certainly won't apologize. Maria Martinez, the 47-year-old woman whose extraordinary courage finally brought Chester Turner's killing spree to an end, passed away in 2019 at the age of 64. According to those who knew her in the years following Turner's trial, Maria never fully recovered from the trauma of that March night in 2002. The psychological scars remained, manifesting in ways both visible and invisible. As mentioned earlier, during the 1990s, serial killer cases were sadly very common in this area. In fact, several killers were active at the same time, earning names like the Multi-City Strangler. And while Turner was undeniably one of the worst, he wasn't alone. Subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.